Right, here we are with another wonderful zesty practitioner, but this is a special friend of mine, Meidi Goodson, who I've known for a long time. Well, because we were live in the same town and involved in another particular thing anyway up here. But Meidi, I know how brilliant she is because she's helped me so much during the times that I was really sick, and she's taught me pretty much everything I need to know about. Well, I don't. I need to know more. Everything I do know
Mm.
about emotional trauma and all that kind of trauma release and emotional balancing. Absolutely brilliant. So, Maidi, please tell everybody what you do and what you'll be offering on if somebody has a session.
Oh, thank you, Phil. Right, no great expectation then. It's quite interesting, isn't it? Because often people say to me, "Oh, what does a psychotherapist do? What is psychotherapy about?" And so it's probably good to start with my own little story, really, which is where in my early 40s to um, I decided to commit myself to some counselling for a period of time that I thought was going to be a couple of sessions. And I felt incredibly self indulgent having, a few hours with this very experienced counsellor. And actually, at the end of my second session, he roared with laughter and said, "You really feel self indulgent, don't you?" And I said, "How did you know?" He said, "Because you think that we have now covered everything, don't you? And that's it." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, you've got nothing coming." He said, "We've only just started." And several years later, I did notice a significant improvement and quite a difference in my life. And a lot of things that I hadn't even recognized were problems and issues. The reason why I'd been through two divorces and it had been hell. I never thought it had anything to do with me. I always thought I'd just chosen the wrong person. So I learned an awful lot about myself in that process, but I also found it quite painful because it was talking about the problem and the issue. And what I later learnt was that the more we talk about an issue, the more we are reinforcing the neural pathways in the brain that that issue is on. So we're actually thickening them, widening them, and reinforcing the negative aspect the more we talk about it. So I then learned that it's not a good idea, really, to always keep telling our negative story because all we will do is reinforce it. And that actually it's a very challenging way to move towards a benefit by just talking about what's wrong. And because of that, I did a lot of research. I did an awful lot of reading after I'd finished my own sessions. I then had a situation where a major trauma hit me when I nearly died giving birth to my son. And I won't go into it. It's a long story, and I think somewhere I've posted the boring details on my website. But um, it made me realize that we do usually need to do quite a lot of work on ourselves, even though we're not aware that we do. Because if anything is going wrong in our life, whatever it is, and we start to feel victimized about anything, there is something going on for us that we need to address to enable us to move forward by not being a victim. And when we complain about anything in our life, then we are being a victim. And to complain about anything in our life, we are in effect saying, "I'm powerless to change this. And it's not my fault. And it's not under my control." Where what I've learned over the years is that every single thing that becomes a negative in our life, we are not powerless. We are absolutely able to change it. And there will be some sort of pattern, a negative pattern, that we have developed over the years that is responsible for why we're having a hard time. And so, from a therapy point of view, when I meet a client, I not only want to make it an enjoyable experience, I don't want to put them through hours and hours of talking about the problem, which is how I first experienced my own transition over several years, which was beneficial but painful. I wanted to use techniques that would really lift whatever was the negative issue and help people to move forward in a much more fun and light-hearted way. And that doesn't mean that I look at everything and think of it as a nothing, or, I'm glib about anything. But one of the things I think puts most people off therapy is the idea of talking about their problem, whatever it is, endlessly. And I think for most people, they can feel how stressful that is. So to then understand that they are then reinforcing the neural pathway that that issue is on becomes more understandable because they feel the discomfort. So I decided to begin my own journey becoming a therapist when I nearly died having my son. I was physically very poorly and I swallowed books on self healing. And I wanted to look at everything that could have contributed to the trauma that I experienced. Was it just bad luck? Was it just fate? Or was there something that I had been doing in my life that had led me to going through the immense physical trauma that was? And what I discovered was that actually, the more stressed we are, the more we've lived our life in fight or flight, which is really what ADHD is. That's why so many people are now being diagnosed with ADHD, because really with ADHD, it's a child who's lived through sequences of trauma. Often, this is how it begins, and has been in fight or flight for a very long time, and has got kind of stuck in fight or flight because the part of the brain that is responsible for enabling us to switch off and on that fight or flight, that fear response, has literally burnt out. The old part of the brain, which is the amygdala, in a young child needs to be very much protected, which is why it's a really good idea to keep babies close to mother for their first sort of few years of development. Because that part of the brain, even if we send a child to nursery, say quite early, maybe before they're a year old and whatever, we are putting a child in a situation where they don't feel as safe as they would do if they were at home with mother. So trauma, when I talk about trauma can be simply starting as something like that, where a child goes to nursery, they're not with a caregiver who they're familiar with. And so a child's fight or flight response gets turned on, and the child becomes very anxious because they don't feel safe and secure in the environment they're in. If we then add to that, maybe dad is going through a rough time or mum's going through a rough time, and one or both of them are shouting. Maybe they're having arguments with each other in front of the baby or the children, whatever age they are. Maybe one of the parents has got an addiction and it's a real problem. There can be a myriad of things that will cause a child to feel unsafe and feel traumatized. So one of the things I'm always looking for as a therapist is actually looking for somebody's history and understanding their history, which is the first thing that I do. How was the relationship with your primary caregivers when you were a child growing up? What do you remember? What don't you remember? And often people will say to me, adults will say to me, actually, I don't remember much of my childhood at all. And when that's the case, I can more or less guarantee that you grew up with a lot of trauma going on around you, which is why you don't remember stuff. Because through therapy, as we clear trauma, and I use a lot of good techniques, which is what I was saying, to do that, that are very simple techniques, but incredibly effective, many of which of, Phil, from hypnotherapy to emotional freedom technique, also known as tapping. Another technique called brain working recursive therapy, which will collapse a neural pathway that old trauma is on. When we start to work and we start to actually collapse trauma or PTSD for somebody, If it started during childhood, what we tend to find is that the person who didn't remember their childhood, as we release trauma and we release old negative issues, actually the client starts to remember a lot more about their childhood because they start to remember the good stuff. So it's a bit like, and I can't be accurate with this, but it's a bit like, for one really negative traumatic thing that happens, so say the day dad really shouted and it terrified the child, um, you need quite a few positives to counteract that negative. And that negative will probably be carried forward in terms of a trauma and affect an awful lot of aspects of your life. So, in the same way as if a child went through an experience of being humiliated, which is so frequent, children get humiliated at school by teachers. I don't know why teachers do not all have to learn child psychology before they're allowed to be with children. Um, Humiliation is a terrible thing for a child, and that can dramatically alter your perspective and the trigger that you'll be holding in your subconscious as an adult. So there are many, many things that can happen to us during childhood. So one of the first things that I'm interested in is, what was your experience with your primary caregivers? How safe and secure did you feel? Or did you grow up believing that your feelings were irrelevant and not important, and that you needed to prioritize the feelings of your primary caregivers and the adults around you, which is a very, very common story. And if somebody has grown up with that, if you like, we call it a starting gate position, and there are different starting gate positions as children, it will absolutely affect your life as an adult. And there will be internal beliefs in your subconscious that you're holding that are negative, that you're not even aware of. One of them might be, my feelings aren't important. Only I need to focus on everybody else around me. Well, that's probably going to lead to anxiety, possibly depression, whatever. But when anybody comes to me as an adult and they are suffering with depression, anxiety, no zest for life anymore, knowing that they're feeling pretty down and pissed off with everything in their life, having a lot of internal beliefs that they can't change things, then we start by unpicking that childhood and looking at what was happening in childhood, because we have techniques that are so simple and straightforward that will release every level of trauma and trauma that can become PTSD. And it becomes fascinating, because what I've seen over the years is that there are certain conditions in childhood where I can more or less predict what the limiting issue will be in adulthood for that person. So I'm trained as a psychotherapist, which means I've worked at and got various diplomas in with different tools. So as a hypnotherapist is one, we can discover an awful lot very, very easily and simply of what might have been happening that was a problem or a trauma by using hypnosis. We can do the same thing, the same kind of investigation using tools like emotional freedom technique, and other techniques as well that I've worked with over the years. And so once we lift trauma, then instantly we start to feel lighter. And it can be the smallest of things that we view as small as an adult that actually have been huge all our life. So I'll give you one example. I can remember as an adult, I'd always believed that I was utterly shit at maths. And anything that was to do with numbers, it's like I was almost frightened of it. I didn't want to look at numbers. And I used to like to keep anything in. When I was in business, I spent years in business in different positions. I like to keep figures very, very simple. So it was like, to make a profit. So if something cost 10 quid, as long as I knew I had to sell it for 30, then I was going to be making roughly 60% profit. And I needed figures to be that easy. And if somebody started to get complex with figures, I'd almost panic. When I was in therapy, one thing that I recognized was at the age of about 9 at primary school, I was asked to stand up and recite my 8 times tables in front of the class. And to me, that was perfectly normal because that's what the teachers asked you to do. It would suddenly be so and so. Can you stand up and do your so and so times tables or whatever? And I used to dread maths lessons because that's what used to happen. And I would instantly go into fight or flight or freeze mode. So that is the same state that we go into if we think a saber-toothed tiger is about to pounce on us. Yeah. So the fight is, okay, I'm prepared to stand there and punch the lights out of this tiger. The flight is, oh my God, I've got to run away very fast, very quickly, straight away. Or the freeze mode, and we often refer to it as being a rabbit caught in headlights, where we literally just stand and freeze. We are so terrified we can't move, we can't do anything. And I can remember that experience and the dread that I felt. And I tried to start doing my times tables, and I was in such a panic. And we can't learn in fight or flight either. This is another thing. So, children who are coming from traumatic backgrounds or parents who might be going through trauma and the child is feeling it, if they're in fight or flight all the time, that's the time when they won't be doing very well at school. Because in fight or flight, a child can't absorb information. So it's not they're stupid, they're not thick, they're none of those things, unless they have a serious sort of mental health condition. That child is just in fight or flight and cannot absorb information. So when I did my 8 times tables, I can remember that what happened was I got it wrong. And the moment I got it wrong, the teacher let me know I'd got it wrong, and everyone in the classroom laughed at me.
Mm.
And I was the one standing up, I was the focus of attention, and I felt desperately humiliated. There is nothing much that will create a worse effect on a child than humiliation. So, literally, from that experience at 9 years old, I grew up believing I was shit at maths and shit at numbers, to a point whereby even when I did my maths GCSE, I wouldn't even fill in the paper because I felt so insecure about it. It was really interesting. And what I find with clients is there are so many examples of that where, as an adult, you apologize and say, oh, well, that happened when I was a kid. Oh, but that was nothing. Well, no, it's nothing as an adult. But when you were a child, your brain wasn't fully developed. And trauma is trauma. And if you have not got adults around you who are making you feel safe and secure and not putting you in positions where they humiliate you, you will be traumatized. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you, I mean, when you took me through something, that happened at boarding school, it was amazing. It just, yeah, just totally kind of defused the memory. But listen, Mighty, seriously, I've just realised that I've been sitting here listening for ages because I could listen to you forever, and you know that you're coming on to one of my events soon, and I want to get a proper
Yeah.
podcast episode. But right, anyway, guys, seriously, if this is a little teaser, it's a longer teaser than everybody else's, I think, because I just wanted to listen to
Sorry.
Mighty because she's great, and I know that if you resonate with her, and how could you not? I mean, seriously, come and get a session with Mighty, and she's absolutely lovely to chat to, and so brilliant. So, Mighty, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I think, can I just say one sentence, and that
Yeah,
is that anything that doesn't feel good in your life, it's not an issue. We can work on it and sort it. Anything.
yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Mighty.
Thanks, Phil.